There we go. After I show up to the people I do. All right, so now I can see what's going on. We're going to look at Hark the Herald Angels Sing this morning. And it's going to be the song we sing right after we're done with this. But interesting background to it. It was written by another prolific songwriter. We were talking about Isaac Watts last week, who had written some 750 hymns. Well, Charles Wesley wrote 6,500 hymns in the course of his life, many of them sort of modeled after the Psalms, and from that standpoint, rewriting the Psalms. His mother, interestingly enough, her name was Susanna. She was the 25th of 25 children. Can't imagine that one. But anyway, the 25th of 25, her father was a preacher. Her husband became a preacher. I believe both of their fathers were preachers. I mean, it went back and back in the Church of England. She was married at the age of 19 and had 19 children of her own. Now, of course, in those days, you think about it, 8 of them were alive when she passed away. 9 of them died in infancy. So it was that time period where you had more children just because so many were not going to make it. She wrote a letter to her husband. Interestingly enough, the statement was that he left for a year over a minor spat that they had. And I'm thinking, there were days that I wished I could have done that, but I never did. I've told you, when I got upset with my wife back in the early days, trying to figure out what marriage was all about, I would run to my office, and of course then my office is filled with all this God stuff, and it's kind of hard to be unhappy with your spouse if you're sitting in a room where God is present, and so you have to go back and apologize and all that sort of thing. She, these are little excerpts of something that she said. I am your wife and the mistress of, and that mistress was a good term in those days, not a negative term. I am the mistress of a large family. The charge of souls belongs to you, but you're not here. Interesting comment. And I believe that strongly, that the males influence. The women do a wonderful job of bringing Christianity and faith into the lives of the children, but it really is the man's role, charge to care for the family. And too many studies talk about how people leave the faith because their father was not active, even though their mother was. And so anyway, she said, the charge of souls belongs to you, but since you're not here, I've taken it on myself. And I want you to know that I spend time each night with a different child, just that child and myself. And this was in a time period where she had about 7 children, and she was meeting with each one of them every night or once a week, all alone with that child. She was a devout woman, had daily devotions on a regular basis throughout her life. And when her husband went to London to help a fellow clergy person who was going through a trial for supposed heresy, she had to live with the interim pastor, not live with, but deal with an interim pastor that she did not like. All he ever wanted to talk about was how you ought to live debt-free in your life, but he never went any further into the expanse of Christianity. And so she started an afternoon church service just for her family, where she would sing a psalm, then she would have a sermon, either something that her father had written or something that her husband had written, and she would give that sermon, and then they would close with a psalm. Well, it didn't take very long, and there were 200 people attending the Sunday afternoon service and very few people coming to church in the morning. But she was quite the lady. She wrote lots of different journals and books, letters and commentaries and that sort of thing. One of her children was Charles Wesley. Charles was the 18th of her 19 children. He went to Oxford. I was wishing men were here. Isn't she at Oxford? Isn't that where she's at?
Yes.
She lives outside of Oxford.
Yeah, so I just thought it would be great if she were here, because she would know a little bit of that heritage. Hopefully she'll listen to this. That while they were there at Oxford, they had he and his brother John had a group Bible study that they would do, and they would systematically work their way through the Scripture and talk about how do we live according to these words and have a holy life. They were criticized a lot by the fellow students, and they ended up being dubbed the Holy Club. But they went on and lived with that. They did a lot of open air preaching, Charles and his brother John. They were concerned for the common man and the people who wouldn't normally come to church. Let's see. It was at the Holy Club that they met a gentleman named George Whitefield, and George was also interested in preaching, and they together, George Whitefield and John and Wesley ended up founding what we now know as the Methodist denomination, not only in England but also over here in America. Charles came over for a short period of time, and then George Whitefield came over and carried out the rest of the work, preaching in the various different places throughout America, the East Coast mostly during that time period. He's known for apparently 18,000 sermons that he preached to over 10 million people. Now I don't know, I haven't gone back and totaled up how many sermons I would have preached over the last 50 years and how many people might have been there. And so part of those 10 million might be that Aaron showed up every Sunday for 10 years or something like that, but still staggering numbers of people that he went around preaching to. One of the real focuses of the Methodist Church, especially in the early days, one of the reasons why they were called Methodists is that they had a method by which they would study the Scriptures and live out what the Scriptures have to say. And so they proclaimed that wherever they went. It was interesting that these two men, Charles Wesley and George Whitefield, were different in their theology, and yet they worked together to build this denomination. And of course, the difference came around this the age-old discussion as to whether or not you are a predestinationist, which is where George Whitefield was coming from, or whether you were a free will person, also called Arminianism, even though it has nothing to do with the country of Armenia or the race of Armenian. It has to do with a man named Armenia who was the proponent of it, and it was really a question of whether or not the gift of God's grace to the world was a gift to his elect, chosen people, specific people, or whether it was given to the whole world as kind of a universal gift out there. And the interesting thing is that as much as you want to get involved in theology and say, oh, well, wait a minute, we're going to just let the Spirit of God do his thing and the elect will be chosen over time, or we're going to have an altar call and say, get down on your knees and start praying. Today is the day, which is sort of the difference between the outcome for predestination or free will. It still comes down to the same sort of thing, is that a pastor up front has no way of knowing whether you are elect or not. And therefore, the call has to be universal to anybody and everybody. If God, for some reason, made a choice to do it with specific, call specific people, I leave that into God's hands. To me, the gospel is for anybody and everybody that wants to hear the message of the gospel. So anyway, that's kind of the background that brings us to the song itself. And you'll notice in the first verse it talks about peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. And that's really the thrust of what Charles and George Whitefield both were really wanting, is to have people reconciled to God, brought back together. And so it's a song really encouraging Christians to go out and evangelize. Now, just so you know, evangelism is one of those bad words in some ways in this world today. Evangelicalism has seemed to be a bad thing, but all evangelism really means, the word itself in Greek is euangelios, and eu means good, and angel means sent with a message, and we are sent with the good news, the news of Jesus Christ. And so evangelists we all are, whether we want to be or not, because we're called to be witnesses of Jesus Christ with this good news for the world. So I encourage you in those words, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. There are so many people in this world who need to be reconciled. I remember Chip Ingram one time was talking in a small group of pastors, and it was something that he said often in his church as well, that there are thousands of people in the county of Santa Cruz that are just waiting for somebody like you to come tell them about Jesus. You might end up with a lot of people who say, no, I don't want it, I'm not interested, that sort of thing. Keep looking. There's thousands of people out there who really want this message of good news. The second verse says, pleased with us in flesh to dwell, Jesus our Emmanuel. And again, that word Emmanuel just means God with us. It's just three Hebrew words that make up that one long word. God with us, and Jesus is our Emmanuel. And he was born, the last verse says, born to give them second birth, to help us to be born of the Spirit rather than just being born of the flesh. So Jesus is the newborn King. That is a message that we want to proclaim, and just really encourage people around us, as it often happens at the Christmas time, to believe the message in the songs that they sing. So be an evangelist in the true sense of the word, to go out and share the good news of Jesus Christ, as did Charles Wesley and George Whitefield with these songs. So let's sing together hymn number
133.
133. Thank you. Hark the herald angels sing.